the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor of the Hargrove Grand, and nobody looked up. That was the thing about luxury hotels. The staff had been trained so thoroughly in the art of selective attention that they could register a guest's presence without actually seeing them. It was a skill. Some might even call it a talent. But on a Tuesday morning in late October, in the marble-floored lobby of one of Atlanta's most prestigious properties, that particular talent would cost one man everything he'd spent 23 years building. His name was Roland Voss. He was the general manager of the Hargrove Grand, and he had run that hotel the way some men run small countries, with absolute certainty that the rules applied to everyone except himself. The woman who stepped off the elevator that morning was named Cecile Drummond, 57 years old, wore a rust-colored wool coat that had seen better days, low-heeled shoes, no jewelry except for a thin gold watch on her left wrist. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a travel mug in her right hand. Her hair was natural, close-cropped, silver at the temples. She looked, to the untrained eye, like someone's aunt visiting from out of town. She was not someone's aunt visiting from out of town. But Roland Voss didn't know that. And in the 4 minutes that followed, he would make a decision that would end his career, humiliate him publicly, and follow his name on the internet for the rest of his professional life. Cecile had arrived the previous evening on a late flight from Washington. She'd checked in under her middle name and a title she rarely used, paid with a card that didn't advertise itself, and gone straight to her room on the 14th floor without speaking to anyone beyond the front desk agent, a young man named Tobias, who had been perfectly professional and had offered her a bottle of water for the road. She'd thanked him. She remembered that. She came down early because she always came down early. That was the thing about spending 30 years in federal oversight. You developed habits. You arrived before the crowd. You watched how things ran before the people running them knew they were being watched. She settled into one of the leather chairs near the window in the hotel's main lobby lounge, the one that looked out onto Peachtree Street. She set her canvas tote on the chair beside her, pulled out a small notebook, and opened it. She ordered a coffee from the lounge server, a woman named Patrice, who smiled and called her Han in the easy way of someone who genuinely liked people. The coffee came in 4 minutes. It was good coffee. Cecile wrote that down. She was 40 minutes into her morning when Roland Voss walked through the lobby. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that came from years of believing he was the most important person in any room he entered. He wore a dark suit, no tie, a pocket square that matched nothing. He had the practiced walk of someone who wanted to be watched. He scanned the lobby the way a landowner might survey his property, not looking for problems exactly, but looking for things that offended him. His eyes landed on Cecile. He stopped. She was aware of him the moment he stopped. She didn't look up from her notebook. He crossed the lobby in her direction. She could hear his footsteps on the marble, measured, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who had never once questioned whether he had the right to go wherever he was going. "Excuse me." Cecil looked up slowly. She gave him the kind of look you give someone who has interrupted you mid-thought, polite but barely. "Can I help you?" she said. Roland Voss looked at her the way people look at things that are out of place. His eyes went to the canvas tote on the chair beside her, to the travel mug, to the notebook, to her coat. He did all of this in about 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, he had already decided everything he needed to decide about Cecile Drummond. "This is a guest lounge," he said. "I know," she said, a beat of silence. "It's reserved for registered guests of the hotel." "I'm aware," she said. He waited, as if the next move was hers, as if she was supposed to stand up, apologize, and leave, as if the entire exchange had a predetermined ending that only required her cooperation. Cecile did not cooperate. She looked back at her notebook. "Ma'am." His voice dropped. It got quieter in the way that some voices get quieter when the person using them wants you to understand that quiet is worse. "I'm going to need to ask you to gather your things." Patrice, the lounge server, had gone very still near the coffee station. She was looking at her tray. "My things are gathered fine where they are," Cecile said, without looking up. "Ma'am." The word again stretched thin. I don't want to make this uncomfortable. Then don't. He straightened, pulled at the front of his jacket, the kind of gesture men make when they're recalibrating. I'm the general manager of this property, he said. My name is Roland Voss, and I'm telling you that this lounge is for hotel guests only, and I have every reason to believe that you are not a guest of this hotel. Now she looked up. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Her expression didn't change. This was something she had learned over many years, in many rooms, the power of simply being still when someone expected you to flinch. What reason? She said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. You said you have every reason to believe I'm not a guest. I'm asking what reason? The pause that followed was the kind of pause that reveals things. Roland Voss was not a stupid man. He understood, somewhere in the back of his mind, that he was standing in a place he could not defend. But he had stood in that place many times before and had always found his way through it because, in his experience, the people he found himself facing, in that particular spot, never pushed back. You don't have a room key card visible, he said finally. I'm sitting in a chair, she said. My key card is in my bag. The lounge opens at 7 a.m. for guests. We don't. It is 7:42, Cecile said. I have been sitting here since 7 o'clock. Your server brought me coffee at 7:04. I have a receipt. She held it up. The hotel's logo was printed across the top. Her room number was on it. Another silence. Longer this time. Roland Voss did not look at the receipt. I'm still going to need you to come with me to verify your reservation at the front desk. The lobby was beginning to fill. A family with luggage near the elevators. A man in a business suit on a phone call near the revolving door. Patrice had moved slightly closer to the coffee station, as if proximity to something solid might help. Cecile closed her notebook. She did not stand up. No, she said. The word landed like something dropped on a hard floor. Clean, final. I beg your pardon? I said no. I am a registered guest of this hotel. I have my receipt. I am sitting in a publicly accessible lounge area during operating hours. I have done nothing that requires me to go anywhere with you. She picked up her coffee mug. If you'd like to verify my reservation, you are welcome to have someone bring up my file. I'll wait here. Roland Voss had not been told no in a very long time. It showed. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite anger, not quite calculation, somewhere between the two. Ma'am, I'm not going to debate this with you in the middle of the lobby. Neither am I, she said. Which is why I've suggested a solution that doesn't require either of us to move. I need you to come to the front desk. I've declined. Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. The man in the business suit near the door had stopped his phone call. The family with luggage had gone still. Patrice had set her tray down on the coffee station counter and was standing with her arms at her sides, very straight, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Roland Voss's shoulder. That, Cecile said, her voice unchanged, would be a significant mistake. He leaned forward slightly. Is that a threat? No, she said. It's information. You're welcome to do with it what you like. He straightened, squared his shoulders, made a decision. Security, he said, without raising his voice. There was a man near the entrance in a dark blazer. He began to walk over. Cecile watched him come. She watched Roland Voss watch him come. She watched the lounge, the lobby, the small constellation of bystanders, who were all very carefully not looking at what was happening, which was its own kind of looking. She had been in rooms like this before. Not this room specifically, but this room. The one where someone with a title and a suit and the weight of an institution behind them decided that they had the authority to make another person disappear. She had been in those rooms, and she had watched what happened to people who didn't have what she had, who couldn't do what she was about to do. She thought about that for just a moment before she reached into her canvas tote. The security guard arrived. He was young, maybe 25, with the careful blankness of someone who hadn't yet figured out how to be in situations like this. Sir, he said to Roland Voss, this woman needs to be escorted from the property. The guard looked at Cecile. She was looking at what she had taken from her tote bag. It was a leather credential holder. She opened it and set it on the table in front of her, face up, where Roland Voss and the security guard and anyone else who cared to look could see it clearly. The seal on the left side was the seal of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. The identification card on the right side read, Cecil Ann Drummond, Senior Investigator, Office of Inspector General. The security guard looked at it, then at Roland Voss, then back at the credential. Roland Voss looked at it for a long time. The Hargrove Grand, Cecile said conversationally, has been under a federal compliance review for the past 8 months. The review concerns, among other things, the hotel's management of federally subsidized event contracts, its ADA accommodation practices, and 3 separate complaints filed by former employees regarding discriminatory treatment by senior management. She paused. I'm here as part of a site observation. Unannounced, as per protocol. She picked up her coffee mug. I have been observing since 7 o'clock this morning. The lobby was very quiet. Roland Voss had gone the color of old chalk. The interaction we just had, Cecile continued, has been documented. The receipt, she held it up again, establishes my presence and my guest status prior to your approach. The request to leave the premises will also be documented. She looked at him directly, as will the fact that you made that request without ever asking for my name, reviewing any record, or offering any legitimate basis for the assumption that I was not a registered guest. She let that sit there. The security guard took a small, careful step back. I'm not here to arrest you, Mr. Voss, Cecile said. That's not what the Office of Inspector General does. But I want you to understand what just happened in this lobby, because I think it's important that you understand it clearly before attorneys get involved, and everyone starts choosing their words very carefully. She closed her credential holder and placed it back in her tote. You approached a woman sitting alone in your hotel's lounge. You did not greet her. You did not ask if she needed assistance. You told her the lounge was for guests, despite having no evidence that she was not a guest. When she produced a receipt, you did not look at it. You escalated. You called security. You ordered her removal. She picked up her notebook. In the 8 months of this review, we have collected similar accounts from 14 other individuals. In 12 of those 14 cases, the individual was black. In 11 of those 12 cases, the individual was a black woman. She stood up. She was not a tall woman, but she stood like someone who had never once needed height to make a point. Patrice, she said. The server looked up, startled. The coffee was excellent. Thank you. Patrice nodded. Her eyes were bright. Cecile picked up her tote and her travel mug and walked toward the elevator. She walked the way she always walked, unhurried, straight-spined, like someone who had somewhere to be and no doubt she would get there. She did not look back at Roland Voss. She didn't need to. Here is what happened after. Roland Voss did not lose his job that day. He lost it 6 weeks later, when the Office of Inspector General completed its site review and submitted its findings to HUD's compliance office, which forwarded a summary to the Hargrove Hotel Group's corporate legal team, which forwarded it to the board. The board had been looking for a reason. They found several. The Hargrove Grand's federal event contracts, worth approximately $4 million annually, were suspended pending an internal audit. The audit found what audits in situations like this usually find: not a single spectacular crime, but a long, unbroken pattern of small decisions made by a man who had never been told no. 3 of the 14 complainants, whose accounts had been collected during the review, were contacted by the hotel group's legal department and offered settlements. Cecile was not involved in those negotiations. That wasn't her job. Her job had been to walk into a hotel lobby on a Tuesday morning and sit in a chair and write in a notebook and drink good coffee and see what happened. She already knew what would happen. That was why she was there. What people don't usually ask, what the people in that lobby didn't ask, what the security guard didn't ask, what Roland Voss certainly didn't ask, is what Cecile Drummond was thinking while she was sitting in that chair. She was thinking about her mother. Her mother, Adele Drummond, had worked in hotel housekeeping for 22 years, not at the Hargrove Grand. That hotel hadn't existed when her mother was working, but at properties like it, in Atlanta and in Memphis, and for 3 years in a place outside of Nashville that her mother always called the resort, with a flatness in her voice that communicated exactly what she thought of it. Her mother had worn a uniform, had used a service entrance, had been trained, as Patrice had been trained, in the particular art of making herself invisible while being completely present. Her mother had never been in a position to open a credential holder and watch a man's face change. Cecile had thought about that, had thought about it deliberately, as a kind of anchor on the flight from Washington. She thought about it in the elevator the night before when she pressed 14 and the doors closed and she was alone with the hum of the cable and her own reflection in the brushed steel door. She thought about it sitting in the chair in the lounge in the 23 minutes before Roland Voss walked through that lobby and decided she didn't belong there. She thought, there are women who look exactly like me who come through this lobby every day, who sit in chairs like this one, who drink coffee and ask for nothing and harm no one and are made to feel, in 100 small ways, that they are taking up space that doesn't belong to them. She thought, most of them don't have a credential holder in their tote bag. She thought, that is the only difference. That is the only difference, and it should not be the only difference. And the fact that it is the only difference is the thing I am here to document. That was what she was thinking. She didn't write it in the notebook. She didn't need to. It had been in her head for 30 years. She flew back to Washington on Thursday. On Friday morning, she was in a conference room on the 4th floor of the OIG's offices on 7th Street, presenting her findings to a team of 4, including her supervisor, a man named Arthur Gaines, who had worked in federal oversight for longer than Cecile had been alive, and who communicated his opinions primarily through the precise angle at which he removed his reading glasses. He removed them at a 45-degree angle when she was done. 14 complaints, he said. 14 documented, she said. We believe the actual number is higher. The pattern shows an escalation over the past 3 years that correlates with the departure of the previous GM and the installation of Voss. Arthur put his glasses back on, looked at the summary on the table. You were asked to leave the premises. I was, by the GM personally. Yes, while you were in possession of federal credentials and seated in a public lounge area of the hotel during documented business hours, with a receipt establishing your status as a registered guest. That is correct. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Did you get the coffee? I did. Was it good? It was excellent, he nodded slowly. Good. He picked up the summary. Let's talk about next steps. Cecile retired from the Office of Inspector General 4 years later, at 61, after a career that had spanned 3 administrations, 2 reorganizations, and more conference rooms than she could count. At her retirement dinner, held at a restaurant in Georgetown that her colleagues had chosen specifically because it was not a hotel, Arthur Gaines gave a speech that was mostly numbers. Cases opened, findings submitted, dollars recovered, because Arthur communicated in numbers the way other people communicated in adjectives, and that was fine, because the numbers were significant. But afterward, a younger woman on Cecile's team, Fatima, 29, 3 years into her first OIG posting, came up to her and said, Can I ask you something? You can always ask me something, Cecile said. The Atlanta case, the Hargrove. I read the file when I joined the team. Okay, you were alone. You didn't have backup in the lobby. You didn't have anyone else there. If he'd just, I don't know. If he'd just called the police instead of building security, it could have been different. Cecile considered this. Yes, she said. It could have been. Weren't you scared? Cecile picked up her glass, set it down, looked at the table for a moment. I wasn't scared for myself, she said finally. I've been doing this long enough that I know how to be not scared for myself. She paused. I was scared for the women who come through that lobby without a credential holder, who sit in that chair and get told to leave and have no leverage, no mechanism. No, she stopped, started again. I was scared that the documentation we submitted would be read and filed and noted, and that some version of Roland Voss would still be standing in some lobby somewhere making the same calculation about the same woman and arriving at the same conclusion. Fatima was quiet. Is that still happening? She said. Cecile looked at her young face, her serious eyes, the slight set of her jaw that meant she already knew the answer and was asking anyway because asking was what you did. "Why do you think I spent 30 years doing this job?" Cecile said. She said it gently. She meant it as the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. There is a particular silence that settles over a room when power has been caught doing what power does when it thinks no one is watching. It is not a triumphant silence. It is not a satisfied one. It is the silence of recognition, the kind that arrives when something you always knew was true gets documented and verified and put into a file and submitted through proper channels, and you understand, simultaneously, that accountability and justice are not the same thing, and that the work of closing that gap is longer and harder and less dramatic than a Tuesday morning in a hotel lobby would suggest. Cecile Drummond knew that silence well. She had built a career inside it. She had sat in chairs that were not meant for her, drunk coffee that she had every right to drink, opened notebooks and watched and written down what she saw, and handed it to institutions that moved slowly and imperfectly, and sometimes not at all. She had done it anyway, because the alternative was to leave the chair, to pick up her tote bag and her travel mug and walk out through the lobby and let Roland Voss stand there in his dark suit and his unearned certainty, believing that his read on the room had been correct, and that she had decided a long time ago, in a room she no longer remembered, was the one thing she was not willing to do.